Good morning, everybody. I speak for my wife as well. We're very glad to be here and to worship with you. It's always a joy to come here, and a nice occasion as well to start the year with this special 40-day condition, and to do that together is so important. So thank you all for your devotion. My title today is Be Creative. I can go now, right? I think that's really it. I want you to be creative. Let's have a look. Can you see anything on the screen behind me there? Sermon, right. Okay. Wonderful. If we turn to the exposition of the divine principle, you will see in the Principle of Creation, section 5. How are we doing? It doesn't like it.
If we open it in the...
If you look at section 5,
That's better.
paragraph 2, it says there, human beings are meant to inherit the creative nature of God and participate with God in his great work of creation. Did you catch that? Yes, human beings are meant to inherit the creative nature of God and participate with God in his great work of creation. Can you see that? There we go. Now, we often talk about the blessing of God that allows us, even requires us, I would say, to be co-creators in creating ourselves, in taking part in our own personal development and path in life. We have to exercise our own kind of education and development and make conscious choices based on our conscience along the way, with help from teachers and parents and others. But we're very involved in that, to make ourselves, to bring out our godly personality and to craft that into something lasting. But I think this quotation says more than just that idea of being part of this growth and development consciously. We are to inherit God's creative nature and participate with God in his great work of creation. For this, then, we have to take a very broad definition of creativity and what it is. So, I think our true Father always looked at, say, scientists or inventors or these kind of people as people alongside artists. They're people who are creating things, and they are often relying, consciously or not, on inspiration from heaven. And that's comes clear when you hear certain stories about how people invented things. You can hear about the spirit world there. So God's creative nature is something extraordinary to even try to emulate. And as I've hinted, I think we have a rather narrow view very often of what art is and who is an artist. The fact is, we've all inherited something of God's creative nature. So this spiritual understanding of art and the nature of the artist, and even what constitutes a work of art, is actually very broad. Artists take after the creativity of God. But also, as we said, so do scientists and inventors. Anybody who's contributing something positive to the world, and new ideas, new developments, new ways of doing things. This is all aspects of our creativity. And it's a very, very exciting and positive aspect of ourselves. So we know that things that people create can be used for bad as well as good. But I don't think that should in any way stop us creating. Right? we have to welcome new developments. Even I was reading a little AI summary, artificial intelligence summary, which you get now with your Zoom calls, right? Of a meeting I had with somebody. And when I read it, I said, that's been put better than I could put it. Did we really talk about that? I suppose we did, but and it was what I was trying to get to, but somehow the artificial intelligence worked it out, and it was there. It's not always right. Sometimes, it's some sentences saying they were talking about this mother coming to Europe, like with a question mark. What was this about? Right? Yeah. I could work out from that what it was we were saying, right? So even then, I think it's important not to take the view that creativity is the sole possession of some elite personages. Some people, they are artists and creators, and the rest of us are kind of off the map when it comes to that. Often at HARP or young persons workshops that I would be teaching, especially in the summer, I would often start by asking, who here has a creative nature? Very few hands go up, right? 2 or 3 hands, because instantly, something to do with our culture, people are thinking, oh, I have to be, almost a professional. I have to be an artist, a painter, or a sculptor, or a dancer, or a great musician, and none of those things. I'd like to be, but somewhere it pushes aside this kind of truth, which is we all have a creative nature. So I would tell them, of course, it's a kind of trick question, and actually they are all people with a creative nature. So just as we talk about, it's quite common nowadays to talk about multiple intelligences. Have you heard that term? Even there's something called football intelligence, right? Which I certainly possess 0 of, right? But, certain people have that, extra bit of ability in that area, and it kind of comes naturally. All the things that are needed to play that game well. So I think also there are multiple expressions of natural creativity. So, this is part of who we are as God's children. And through this, we inherit something of God's characteristics. It's wonderful. It just struck me as I was sitting there. I chose this topic. And of course, this is Harrow Arts Centre. And we're being serenaded by, Don't Cry For Me, Argentina on a brass band. And I thought, oh, this is the place to be, isn't it, right? Absolutely. So our true father put it that the core of art is love. That's something you can take home with you, right? The core of art is love. People question art a lot because a lot of art is questionable. And what is often missing when we have those kind of questions about, is this art, or how can you call this art? It's because love is not at the core. If love were at the core, it would be very obvious, I think, what is art and what is good art. So, songs, dancing, art, these are ways that human beings respond to God's joy and God's laughter. Father says, for the love of the world, God comes down and resonated with us through singing, dancing, and art. For the love of the world, God comes down and participates in these things. Why would God want to be involved? I think it's simply that it's expressing something of his nature. He sees himself reflected. If you see yourself reflected, you want to be there. Right? And God wants to be there. So this is really a chance to air some very beautiful quotations from our true Father, to be honest. Here he says, to be an artist is to make one's life a work of art. Children's education should be imbued with art. A wife should be an artist of the emotions in the way she honors and shows appreciation to her husband. I believe that it is a greater art than the paintings that hang in museums. The greatest value of art is to beautify and elevate love in the family. Expressing God's nature, living by that love which is at the core of the universe. So everything in that respect should be art. I once had a dream when I was sitting next to our founder, our true father, and he asked me a surprising question. He said, "What can I give you?" So I surprised myself in the dream. I often do. I have kind of dreams that make me wake up laughing, I surprised myself in this dream because I didn't give what would be a typical answer for me, right? Something like, "Oh, you don't need to do that," very kind of, very English. "Oh, that's fine. You've done far too much for us already. I don't," a kind of Hugh Grant style response. Rather, I just said immediately, like I say, it surprised me in the dream, and very confidently, I said, "I would love you to draw me a picture." And I think Father had never been asked that before. At least, I can't tell, but so he just got a piece of paper and started drawing. He drew a boat and signed it. And I thought, this is the greatest treasure, right? How wonderful. And how grateful I was. He just he understood. And he just did that for me. Not in reality, unfortunately. Anyway, I was reminded of that, thinking about this topic. I was mentioning also, I don't know if anybody could join the Wednesday prayer call, but True Mother is currently emphasizing that we teach and we can incorporate in our outreach more of principles of creation than perhaps we have done in the past, and putting less emphasis on restoration or these kind of topics. And that's, I think, takes, I'm in a process myself of thinking, really, what does that mean? The principle is the principle, and it'll stand always. But in terms of what is right, or what's the best way to touch the hearts of people in this age, then maybe that's the thing that we should be pursuing. Because you could, if you're from an older age, you could turn it round critically and say, why is nobody concerned about this or that or this or that? But also what is missing from their lives is some very pure experience of love and beauty and goodness. And if we can give that to somebody, we may, creatively initiate a very powerful relationship which allows the love of God to touch them and allows the Holy Spirit to come and lead them further. So that's my kind of thesis of the morning, if you like. I see that as we're kind of moving from era or emphasis on salvation to restoration to recreation, which the principle talks about these as being synonymous, but like all good synonyms, there are very different words, different reasons for those words, right? So they each have a certain use or certain meaning. Yet they describe the same process. Salvation is restoration, is recreation. But they're describing the same process, but in different ways. And we can, through this, we can ask, which today for people is the more appealing of those three? Which is the more appealing and which is going to reach their heart? So I think it's important to think of ways and be creative in those ways, how we can employ the principle of creation in what we do. The principles of creation, though, and this was a challenge for me, again, when I was teaching heart workshops originally, it can be taken as being rather dry and philosophical, right? Anybody struggle with that a bit, It can come across that way if you just read chapter 1 of Divine Principle. But actually, for me, the opposite is true. Anything that we do will bring joy and happiness to ourselves and to others if it embodies the principles of creation that originate in God and that we inherit from God as our heavenly parent. So let me share just some. This is just one of the examples which I use when I'm teaching. I started out by teaching children this way, but now I do it in any 7-day workshop, actually, right? Because I don't think this area should be left as a kind of bit of philosophy, when you talk about subject and object or masculinity and femininity or these kind of things. It shouldn't be left like that or like little bubble diagrams, which kind of people follow, but they don't really know what you are talking about. So I'm going to illustrate one point. Are you ready? This is Stonehenge, right? So this extraordinary building, maybe built about 3,100 or 3,500 BC, before Christ, or before the Common Era. So, yet what interests me is that the engineering here, although extremely difficult to build this and taking an enormous amount of effort, it's very simple engineering, right? It's what we call post and lintel system. Vertical posts or columns and horizontal beams, which you have to somehow get on top to bridge the gap. So enormous amount of effort went into it, but in the concept of the engineering, it's very simple. Would you agree? So here, 2,500 years later, you have a Greek temple. They perfected this kind of style and these so-called orders. And I would say, if to go back to this, that this is a very masculine kind of principle at work. It's, it does that job that it's asked to do. It's there for structure and it's there for a solid bit of engineering to hold the ring of stones up on the top. This actually does exactly the same thing, and it's the same system. There are essentially posts, which we call columns, and there are lintels, blocks that go to bridge the gap between those. They're more kind of measured, and the columns would not be solid, but they would be very carefully cut. And added onto this is an extraordinary level of what I would say is a feminine quality. Right? So still there's that masculine structure there, but then lots of subtleties get not added on, that was the wrong expression, but they're kind of harmonized together, the masculine and the feminine. So if we look at it how it would have looked, something like this, there's evidence that it was painted back in the day, in the original kind of temple architecture. So there's a lot of sculpture there. There's if you see these columns, they are not straight actually. They have what they call an entiasis, which is a very slight curve. And that is more pleasing to the eye. It seems to carry more of the weight, so the roof floats a little bit. So what the Greeks were doing were playing with optical illusions. The steps at the front of these temples, actually they're higher in the middle than at the edges. Because if they were flat, the extra thickness of that triangle, the middle of the triangle, would make the optical illusion that it was actually bent down. So they correct for that by putting in a curve that doesn't need to be there. Also, those columns, as in the Parthenon, if you take the center line of the columns, they will join about a mile high, the center lines. In other words, they're not entirely vertical, they're slightly leaning in by a fraction, but very deliberately. So there are all these kind of interesting subtleties there, which means they were doing it for a purpose. It didn't have to be there to hold the building up, but it was from some other pursuit. the pursuit of beauty, the pursuit of something almost transcending this world, and to make it a place for the worship of gods, of course. So here, True Father is saying, art is worthless unless there's a profound emotion in the background. A great work of art should be capable of arousing deep emotion, whether one views it today or 1,000 years from now. A painting that can stimulate such a feeling deep in our hearts is called a masterpiece. So when I was mulling over these Greek and later Roman temples, I was thinking, what's different about them? What makes them such a pinnacle of artistic achievement that's kind of emulated down through the centuries, inspiring either direct copies, which you'll see, or borrowing those styles, especially for important public buildings. You go to the British Museum, it's using that kind of architecture, or the American Capitol building is like that, or the Chonwon-gung, has those elements in it. Still a kind of new version of those classical elements and harking back to those things, because I think somewhere they got something right, something which was a very profound harmonization of masculine and feminine elements in a really perfect balance, such that generation after generation people have always seen beauty in it. It wasn't just a passing fad or a style that people liked and then threw away. It wasn't a fashion in that sense. It was something more, not because of what it was, as to how it embodied the principle. So I would kind of rest with you today a thesis that if something embodies the principles of creation, it will last in terms of its value, and it will be appreciated by generation after generation, whether it's in music or in architecture like this, or whatever area, or a good bit of design, which is going to last through the centuries. So, again, the principle says that every man has both male and female characteristics, right? Also, every woman has female and male characteristics. And these qualities actually refer to complementary characteristics that themselves are perfectly harmonized in God. And you know how somewhere we see the introduction of more Oriental philosophy when Father's talking about these things. It pairs things such as convex and concave together, or left and right, or rough and smooth. Speaking of these things, when you speak of one, you're kind of automatically acknowledging the existence of its counterpart, right? So this is the case with masculine and feminine. It's the interplay of these complementary pairs that resonates with everything that God creates. And we as human beings respond to this and experience it as beauty, whether we are male or female. So we have a much better screen than in past sermons. So I'm very excited. I don't know what's changed, but it seems to be good today. So here you see, I've got a few more pictures for you. These are the Corinthian columns. They don't have to be like that. Again, for the structural purposes, they don't add anything to it. But visually, they make it look much lighter than a kind of Stonehenge approach, right? And it seems to float and seems to be very ethereal in that way. Even the bottom here, you see how it's quite a lot of trouble gone to make these curves in the surface of the column. These are called flutes, and this fluting produces this lovely grading of shadows. Do you see on this picture? You need a place with good sun. That's why. Top of where the Parthenon is, that's a wonderful place for this, because there's always bright sun. So it shows the kind of roundness of it through these stark shadows. So it's a lot of extra work to go to, but somebody felt this was necessary for kind of aesthetic purposes. God's heart of true love is a heart to give more and more, and then to forget and forget again. So, Father said it's to give unconditionally and to live for the sake of others. This is the foundation of the world of heart. God's ideal out of which he created the world began from his heart. And the arts which spring from this origin should resemble this heart. Hence, in the world of art, there can be no barriers. It's a way forward to part, I think, of God's effort to recreate one world is to utilize the arts more and more. Right? I remember Father being asked, why his put such emphasis on things like Little Angels or Universal Ballet or this kind of project. Even early on, in the movement's development, Father was already doing that. But he was very clear, what are you going to be doing in the kingdom of heaven? What are you going to be doing? It's sowing a seed for some future life where we can really enjoy in a newfound freedom all the beauties, all the goodness, all the kind of limitless aspects that our creativity can lead us to and to share with others. And that will create a kingdom of heaven. So he was very visionary in thinking of that. Even though there were enough problems to be caught up with, he was still thinking, let's lay the foundation for what's going to be the future and what's going to last. As we say, principal lectures, in the end, most of what we're teaching is going to be history, except for the principles of creation. It's the only thing which will last out. The other may be interesting to people. Did human beings really do that? To each other? Do they behave that way? We'll have these kind of questions from our children, hopefully, or their children. But yes, that was the past. That was on our fallen journey. And to conclude, I remember one more very moving thing to me from our true Father, when he said that when everything is over and the kingdom of heaven is built, because of the journey that humankind has gone through the fall, that kingdom of heaven will be more wonderful than it would have been had humankind not fallen. It'll be more wonderful than the kingdom of heaven would have been if humankind had not fallen, which I felt that's an amazing kind of justice for God himself, isn't it? And I could put it into some context myself by thinking, yes, a person who's always had a very comfortable life has a certain quality of love, and that's wonderful. They can love people. But a person who's been through a lot of hardships but has come out victorious in terms of the realm of heart, and they can love people, and they could even love people who are doing terrible things to them. That person's love is understandably deeper. It's enriched, through that experience, an experience that maybe they should never have had to go through. But if they could survive that and pull through, then the love is even deeper. And so too for this world that we're heading for. So my message really today is a simple one. I wanted to do something a little bit different, really. So I hope it struck some of you. But I'm encouraging you to think creatively. I'm not going to give you examples of what to do, but in witnessing and in our outreach, what can we do that's a little more creative, that might surprise somebody, or they'll be surprised by love. And I think that's a quality of true love. True love always somehow has a little element of surprise, right? Have you noticed that? It's like, oh, you did that for me? I wasn't expecting that. Oh, that's so lovely, right? That kind of surprise element is always there. And it can always be there, especially in the husband-wife relationship. You can always do something to surprise your partner. And they'll be thinking, I didn't know he loved me that much. Or, I didn't know she loved me that much. So creativity is where we get that kind of extra injection of something which is godly by nature and which also goes to enrich the lives and make more beautiful the lives of others. Thank you. Please join me in prayer. Our loving Heavenly Parent, we pray that you can be the one to encourage us and stimulate our innate creativity that we all have, and that through us other people can feel and be open to a world of love that perhaps they've not experienced in their life. Unconditional love is rare in current society. But you have explained to us that the closest to the original unconditional love of God is the love of a mother for her child. And yet all our relationships of love should have that quality to them. We have a long way to go in our restoration of love. But if this is really the time to focus on recreation as a kind of guiding spirit, then we pray you can open our minds and hearts to lots of new ways of doing things and to new ways of helping each other. We don't have to be professional, staggering proponents of any art form, but we do need a genuine heart of love that reflects your nature, and we want to embody as much of your nature in everything that we do. We thank you, we offer this time to you, and pray you can accept our sincere wishes and prayers. I report this in my name, David Hanna of the Blessed Central Family, our Jew.